Hi everyone and welcome to week 10 of our Devising Theatre online workshop series. My name is Margot, I'm the Artistic Director of Milk Crate Theatre.
I am Lucy, I am support artist.
Yeah, so this is week 10 of 10. Who knows, we may continue. I hope that we do because there's so much more to explore. We barely even touched the surface of Devising Theatre, but hopefully you've learnt a lot and been inspired so far. Today we're going to talk about narrative, another massive topic, but again, we're just going to scratch the surface as best we can. But basically, I think, to follow on from our previous weeks where we've been looking at different, you've been looking at your character, the histories, different ways of exploring things about your character that you might know. Then we looked at symbolism, a whole range of things that could represent your character. And then last week, the task was to create some scenes related to those ideas. So hopefully at this stage, you have a whole bunch of scenes and ideas just sitting all over the place. No pressure. But, so now we can look at all of those little ideas and we can start to kind of think about piecing together a bit of a narrative for your work or for your character, or, if we were working in a group at this stage, we could piece things together as a group with all the different characters.
Yeah.
And a narrative can be so about a character can have its own life narrative.
Yeah, or it could just be, particularly as we're working with little snippets of ideas, it could just be what is the dynamic or the emotion of a particular piece. Like if it's movement sort of stuff, is it more internal, or is it does it get huge, and how might those pieces fit together just based on that, or just images, how one image to speak to another.
Yep.
Doesn't have to be narrative in terms of this is everything that's ever happened
to
my character, or even just this is a day in the life of it. It can be much more loose than that.
Absolutely. And it can be a day in the life, or one part of someone's life, a month that they spent on Earth or something, for example.
Yeah.
And there are so many different ways to construct narrative. Today we're going to talk about the traditional narrative arc. And this traditional arc is really, if you look at any kind of mainstream movies or films or even television shows, even episodes of television shows, theatre pieces, it's a pretty common arc. So we start with the exposition or the opening or a place of stasis. So everything is as it should be. Then some kind of conflict occurs. There's a problem. And we start to experience rising action. So maybe that problem increases in intensity, or people start to gather to try and solve this problem or to surmount a challenge, something like that. And we were talking previously about films where people might go to war. If you look at a lot of Star Wars and Game of Thrones and those kinds of adventure movies that kind of rise to a very climactic point. So that's the climax. Something happens. Usually the good guys win. There's a falling action after that point, where everything needs to, changes need to be made for this new order where think good rules again, and we come back to a place of resolution.
Yeah, you settle
back to
down.
stasis, settle back down. So it's a rise and down. That's a very traditional arc.
And in terms of emotion, that it's got that hit right before it ends, because you're kind of building the tension. And emotionally it gets more and more emotion, and then that you can feel in that movie, and then before you leave the cinema you get kind of taken back to an we're okay zone. Like here is some niceness, even if it's been quite an emotional movie. Here's some things to settle you before you go on your way.
Yes. And we do like that sometimes, don't we? Sometimes we want that.
Yeah.
But the advantage of working in theatre, and especially in devised theatre, where we're making everything up from scratch, we have the opportunity to mess with that. So you could take that narrative arc and you could mix up your scenes to make a whole completely other narrative. You might start at a climactic point and end up in rising action. I don't know.
Yeah.
Totally mess with it.
Yeah, totally. You can you can have a climax that you kind of, that you know, whether we all know you're building to, but where you've actually taken the sting out of it somehow. So it's kind of like you're going along with the formula, but we all know why, and we all know that it's formulaic, and we all know that it's a bit ridiculous, and we're kind of just along for the ride for the characters or for whatever we're making fun of, maybe, lots of different ways.
Yeah. And also what you were saying as well, which I love, Lucy, is that, you may not follow this kind of traditional narrative arc at all, but you've got this bunch of ideas and images, and the narrative that you take is emotional, or it's one thing leads to another. That's still narrative. It doesn't have to be a narrative of a piece, doesn't have to follow a traditional arc.
Yeah. And another example of another structure, Kisho Tenketsu, which is used a lot in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean traditional work, and a lot in manga these days, and sometimes in horror movies. So it is more like you do the introduction, which is ki. Sho is development. Ten is twist, where you kind of, your point of view is twisted. And ketsu, which is the conclusion. So it's more like it's a way of moving along the action that doesn't depend on conflict. So Studio Ghibli uses this a fair bit. If you've seen Porco Rosso, that there's a lot of action in that, actually. There's a lot of like kind of violence, but none of it evolves the story, really. The story doesn't depend on it. And at the end, one of the last scenes is actually this big, there's finally a punch-up match between the two guys that have just been trying to fight each other the whole movie, and it's kind of, it's really just almost a B line, but they're built up to this thing, and they just end up punching each other until they're just exhausted and everyone's bored, and like the storyline just continues. They just, I think they just get dragged away or something after a while, because they just end up beaten and just like trying to punch again, exhausted. It almost does, it seems like it's going to lead up to that, but it's actually just shows that it's ridiculous. And the twist is often that, with Studio Ghibli particularly, it's that you think someone is going to be an enemy, and you think this person is, you see someone and it's like there's some person that we relate to, and then there's someone who's maybe threatening them, and you think, that threatening person is the bad guy, and then you kind of, they maybe talk, or they get to know each other, or they find a way around each other, and they find a way of working together maybe, or just working around it. It just becomes more like your idea of that character is twisted, so you can actually get along somehow, or you can move past it without fighting them.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's just not so static.
Yeah.
And any place where expectations can be subverted is always fun.
Yeah.
In
definitely.
the creative process too.
Yeah.
So the task that we're going to set this week is to have a think about your scenes that you have, and put together some kind of narrative, or the ideas that you have, and that narrative can be for your character. It could be a day in the life of the character, or it
Mhm.
could be a point in time for the character, their month on Earth.
Yeah.
You can have a think about what that is, the ideas that you've come up with, and just come up with a very basic narrative. You can do it in any kind of formulation that you want. You can just piece your scenes together and in a way that makes sense to you, or you can look up these narrative arcs that we've described to you today. You can Google them or see if you can find a completely new arc. There's lots out there. There's lots of different ways of telling a story, but have a go. And for example, let's talk about your character Jetty and some options for her if we were to create a narrative for Jetty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking through the short pieces we made last week, and I'm thinking there's a time of her anxious, but then taking a leap forward, and then just running up and having to do it again and again and again. And how that might fit into a story. I've got that and her being kind of alone, but trying to get her courage up in singing, and her kind of falling between walls, which I kind of feel like there's something about school in that, in being directed. I think that I would put the one between walls first, and then I would maybe do the singing somewhere alone, and then the leap, and maybe it's just the one kind of leap into something, but I feel like she might make a choice, some kind of choice. Maybe she goes to a party. There was a bit of a storyline that I started with a few weeks ago where she goes to a party and she has to hitchhike home. Maybe that's part of that.
I like that. To me, I would read that as there's some kind of, to see that first scene, there's some kind of indecision happening, or some kind of unsettled feelings, also because she's moving away from the character, from our point of view, away from us. She's looking for something else. That's how I would read it. And then, singing out the window and singing, a very empowering song for a young person.
Yeah.
About roaring, and, it's Katy Perry.
She's trying.
She's trying. And then, so maybe she's then like, looking for what that is. Yeah. And then taking the leaps. We don't know what's going to happen next. It's really exciting.
Yeah. And if I put if we changed the order of them as well, it's kind of a different story, because then I feel like she's maybe had a leap and found that she's just kind of trapped between two things. Maybe she's tried that and then she's a bit trapped, and then maybe she's dreaming of going outside the window. Maybe there's some kind of a wanting to escape. It really, the order really changes how you end up thinking about it.
So if you put the jumping first, and then the swaying,
jumping, and then the swaying, and then the
singing out the window. Amazing.
Whether or not I put a story about what realistically might have happened to Jetty, that could be an order of movement. And also in between those, they don't even, like, your ideas, those three ideas so far, you could still even separate them and create space between them, and make other small pieces, or incorporate some text or something in between them to shape that narrative as well. I don't know if I'm going a bit too deep in no, but like what happens between them? What that's something we were talking about in the week about movement as well. Like, how do you get from this movement to this one?
So true.
All right. What happens in the meantime?
A lot to think about. We could take this so far, and we could obviously sit here for very many hours talking and contemplating all the possibilities, but just take what you've got, take your ideas, have a go, piecing them, your ideas together, come up with some kind of narrative. Doesn't matter what that narrative looks like. Just get a string of ideas, or a circle of ideas. I don't want to be predictive about your shapes.
Find a way of mushing them together.
Yes. And just in case this is our final week of this series, I doubt it will be, but just in case, thank you so much for joining us throughout these 10 weeks. I can't believe it's been 10 weeks, but it's been really wonderful. And if we continue, we hope that you will join us.
Yeah, the Zoom chats have been so lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. We will either see you next week or we'll never see you again. But thank you so much. Thank you so much. We will see you again in some kind of format. We will see you again, and thank you. Bye.